Buckle up because today's deep dive is going to be a wild one.
Oh,
You guys requested a look at a true aviation near miss, and this one will definitely get your heart racing. We're diving into Olympic Airways Flight 411, a Boeing 747 that came terrifyingly close to crashing in Athens back in '78.
yeah. What gets me about this one is just how close it was. Really shows you how one tiny thing going wrong in aviation can spiral into, well, almost unthinkable.
Absolutely. So let's set the scene for everyone. It's August 9th, 1978. Picture a blazing hot summer day in Athens. Olympic Airways Flight 411, a Boeing 747-200, they called it Olympic Zeus, was getting ready to take off. Standard transatlantic flight headed for New York City, packed with 400 passengers. Lots of American tourists, actually, ready to head home after vacation.
And at the controls, you've got Captain Safis Megatis. Now, this guy was experienced 32 years of flying under his belt, along with his co-pilot, Konstantinos Kostas Vikardos. Both incredibly skilled, especially when it came to flying this beast of a plane, the Boeing 747. Still pretty new back then.
Right, and the 747 was a total game changer for air travel. But what made it so much more complex to fly than other planes at the time?
Think of it like trying to pilot a building that can fly. That's basically what it was like. So much bigger and heavier than anything else in the sky then, needed incredibly powerful engines, and the systems to keep it up in the air, those were incredibly complex.
Wow, I can only imagine. So picture this. Olympic Zeus is taxiing out onto the runway, loaded up with 160 tons of fuel for the long flight ahead. Engines roar to life, they start speeding down the runway faster and faster, and then just a few seconds after they lift off the ground, everything goes sideways. One of the engines fails. It just dies. And they lose a huge amount of power.
And this is where it gets really interesting. See, engine failure during takeoff, it happens. Tragic, but it happens. What Captain Megatis did next, though, that's what's incredible. Instead of trying to abort the takeoff, which, let's be honest, at that altitude, that speed could have been catastrophic, he decides in a split second to keep going up.
Talk about nerves of steel. But why was aborting the takeoff so risky at that point? They were still so close to the ground, right?
Exactly. With a 747, that size, that weight, and so close to the ground, slamming on the brakes is the last thing you want to do. Huge chance of skidding off the runway, potentially bursting into flames, complete structural failure, you name it.
Okay, so continuing the climb, that was definitely the lesser of two evils. But they were still in a critical situation, down an engine. What happened next?
Well, to stay airborne, they had to get creative and fast. They retracted the landing gear early. Might sound strange, but it actually reduces drag, helps you gain a little altitude.
Wait, wouldn't retracting the landing gear that early make it almost impossible to land safely if they had to make an emergency landing?
Absolutely a risk, and a big one. They were basically giving up the option of a smooth landing for the chance to stay up in the air, and it gets even more intense. To clear a 200-foot hill at the edge of the airport, they had to fly incredibly low. I mean, we're talking practically scraping rooftops here.
You're kidding. I can't even imagine the terror in the cockpit. Were the passengers at least aware of what was happening?
You'd think so, right? But get this, a lot of the passengers, they had no clue how dangerous the situation was. They thought the crazy low altitude, that was intentional. Some of them were even taking pictures as they flew what was practically rooftop level over Athens.
Wait, are you serious? Snapping photos while their plane was nearly hitting buildings? That's unbelievable. So some passengers are casually enjoying their scenic tour of Athens, while the pilots, they're fighting to save their lives and the lives of everyone on board. What was going through their minds at that point?
It was a desperate race against time, against physics, really. They needed to maintain enough speed to avoid stalling, basically losing lift and just falling out of the sky, and all while trying to navigate a city, a densely populated city, and find a place to land safely. All this while flying at a terrifying 160 miles per hour, just 180 feet above the ground.
180 feet. That's lower than some skyscrapers. I'd be convinced this was it.
Yeah.
So what happened next? How did they get out of that terrifying situation?
Okay, so they're flying way too low, trying not to stall, dodging buildings. This is where I'd be freaking out. So what happens next?
Well, remember Mount Aigaleo, that
Yeah.
mountain we talked about earlier?
Yeah, over 1,500 feet, right? Not exactly something you can just fly over at that altitude.
Exactly. And a normal turn at that altitude, that speed, impossible. Plane would have stalled out, no question, sent them spiraling down. They were, this literally seconds from disaster.
Man, this is giving me chills just thinking about it. So what did they do?
This is where I guess you'd call it a bit of luck combined with some serious skill comes in. Right at the last possible second, a light tailwind picks up.
You mean like a tiny push in the right direction?
Exactly that. And that little tailwind, it gave them just enough lift, just a little boost, so Captain McGetti's could make a gradual turn, a really shallow one, and just barely, I mean, barely maneuver around Mount Igaleo. Missed it by, I don't know, a hair's breadth. I bet there was a huge sigh of relief in that cockpit. But they weren't out of trouble yet, were they?
Oh no, not even close. Still dangerously low on fuel, and landing a jumbo jet, well, it's not exactly like parking a car. They needed to lighten the load and find a way to get on the ground safely.
Did they try to make it back to the airport?
They did, but it was a huge risk. They decided to dump fuel, lighten the load, flew over the sea near Piraeus, tried to minimize the risk, if the fuel ignited.
Dumping fuel at that altitude, that sounds even more dangerous.
It was a desperate move, but they needed time and altitude. See, heavier the plane, the more speed, the more lift you need to stay up. Dumping fuel, it's like making the plane lighter so it can fly slower, lower.
Wow, that's incredible they were able to pull that off. What about air traffic control? Were they in the loop at this point?
Can you imagine being those controllers? This jumbo jet, they thought it was gone, vanished, and suddenly, there it is again, pops up on radar. Must have thought they were seeing things.
I bet. So back to Olympic Zeus. Lighter load, a little more altitude. What did they do?
Captain McGattis, gotta hand it to him. The man was ice under pressure. Somehow he guides that plane back towards Elinikon International Airport.
They made it back, thank goodness. But how did they land? They retracted the landing gear so long ago.
They did make it back, but it wasn't over yet. Landing gear up. That'd be
Yeah.
disastrous.
So how did they get the landing gear down? Was it stuck or something?
No, thankfully not. Remember how they'd retracted it early to reduce drag? Well, now they had to extend it, and at a way lower altitude, way slower speed than you're supposed to.
Talk about a high pressure situation. So
Yeah.
what happened?
Somehow they got that landing gear down, and yeah, it was a rough landing, but they got everyone on the ground safe and sound. Really shows the expertise of these pilots, their composure in a moment like that.
Unbelievable. Can you imagine those passengers taking pictures? They had no idea how close they came to, well, not making it out.
It really goes to show, even when everything seems routine, things can change in an instant. And when they do, it's the skill of people like Captain McGattis, his whole crew, that makes the difference between a close call and a tragedy.
Absolutely. So the plane landed, everyone's safe, but the big question remains. What caused that engine to fail so catastrophically right after takeoff?
Now that's where the investigation gets really interesting. It reveals a lot about aviation safety, about the human element, even with incredibly advanced technology.
Okay, now you've got me hooked. What did the investigation uncover?
So the plane is down, everyone's safe, but I imagine there were a lot of shaken passengers wondering what exactly went wrong up there.
Oh, absolutely. And the official investigation, it was led by Boeing themselves. They wanted to know too. Turns out it wasn't just one single thing that caused this near disaster. More like a chain reaction, a series of events, decisions, all piling up.
Okay, so walk me through it. What did the investigators find out?
One of the first things they discovered was a problem with the engine's water injection system. Water injection? What's that?
Well, think of it like this. When a plane's taking off, especially on a hot day, and remember it was sweltering in Athens that day, the air's thinner. Engines have to work a lot harder to generate thrust, and that's where the water injection comes in.
So it's like giving the engines a boost when they need it most.
Exactly. Like a shot of adrenaline for a runner right before a race. Problem was, in this case, the crew, they thought they were dealing with a potential water shortage. There was a warning light, so they accidentally turned the system off right after the engine failed.
Oh, no. So the moment they needed that extra power the most.
Yep. And that's when it all went downhill fast. No water injection. The remaining engines, they were struggling to provide enough thrust, almost impossible to climb at a normal rate.
Wow. Talk about a critical error at the worst possible time. So it was the engine failing, plus that water injection issue that really created this terrifying situation. But you mentioned earlier there were even more factors they uncovered.
Right. Remember how we talked about them retracting the landing gear so early after takeoff?
Yeah, to reduce drag.
Exactly. Now, while that helped them gain some altitude at the beginning, the investigation found it also increased drag overall.
A trade-off then. Less drag for a little bit, but a much tougher time landing later.
You got it. And look, no one's denying Captain McGattis, his co-pilot. They showed incredible skill, kept that plane in the air. But the official report, it did list that early landing gear retraction as a factor in what almost happened.
So it wasn't just the plane malfunctioning, but also some human error that played a role. Makes sense.
That's the thing about this whole event, really makes you think. Aviation safety, it's not just about having the best technology, it's about how we use that technology, how humans interact with it, especially under extreme pressure.
Absolutely. So, as terrifying as this incident was, I'm guessing it had a big impact on the aviation industry, right? Led to some major changes.
Oh, without a doubt. This near miss, it was a wake-up call. Big time. Significant safety improvements across the board. For example, pilot training programs, completely revamped. Much more focus on crew resource management. Basically, making sure everyone in the cockpit is communicating clearly, making decisions together, especially in an emergency.
So no matter how stressful it gets, everyone needs to be on the same page, talking to each other clearly.
Exactly. And on the tech side, cockpit design, warning systems, they all got an overhaul. The goal was to make sure pilots had all the crucial information right in front of them, clear as day, no room for misinterpreting anything, especially in those high-stress moments.
So it was a combination of, like you said, the human element and technological advancements that came out of this.
Absolutely. And it went beyond just the planes and the pilots. Airports, they all started reviewing their safety procedures, how they handle emergencies, evacuations, everything. This one incident, it had a ripple effect on the whole industry.
Making flying safer for everyone in the end.
That's right. And it really shows how, even from a potential disaster, even when it's that close, we can still learn something, make things better. The story of Olympic Airways Flight 411, for me, it's a powerful reminder. We got to stay vigilant, rely on expertise, and never stop trying to make aviation safer.
Couldn't agree more. Really puts things in perspective. Hearing a story like this makes you think about all the work that goes into keeping air travel safe, all the people involved, the skill, the quick thinking.
It truly is remarkable. We often take it for granted, but flight is a marvel. Engineering, human ingenuity, all of it. And these kinds of stories, they remind us, even with all the progress, we can't get complacent. Safety, it's a journey, not the destination.
Beautifully put. And on that note, I think that's a wrap on this incredible deep dive, full of suspense, insights, and a powerful reminder that even when things look bleak, human skill, ingenuity, they can make all the difference. This episode has given me a renewed appreciation for the complexities of aviation and everyone who works tirelessly to keep us safe in the air. Thanks for joining us on this journey, and remember, sometimes the most valuable lessons come from our closest calls.
We hope you enjoyed the podcast. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to make sure you hear our latest paranormal investigation, air disaster investigations, and ghostly tales.